Hey there everybody, Brian Davis with Home Improved Man. Today I'm going to take you through the installation of a toilet. A couple things you need to have in order to install a toilet. One is a toilet. Two, a place to put the toilet. And then beyond the usual water source, you'll also need a wax ring. And you'll also need a set of bolts. Sometimes they will come with a wax ring, but not always. So do make sure that you have one of these. The bolts, you'll see, have a little notch up at the top. And that notch will snap off. And so basically what that means is that the bolt is adjustable height, so we can set it to whatever height we need. We can leave it fully on there, and we'll find out once we install it. Now, another thing that I want to point out before we begin is that if you look down in the hole here, there is a rag. Now, I'm perfectly comfortable touching this because this is a new setup, so no need to get grossed out. I had to replace the pipe because of some rot around it. But the rag is very important. It serves two purposes. The first purpose is it keeps you from dropping things down in it. And I had previously dropped a bolt down in there because I did not have the rag. The second purpose, and arguably the more important purpose, is that it keeps the odor away. At the other end of this pipe is a bunch of wastewater and sewage. And the odors from these objects, from this sludge, can drift its way back up through the pipes, and so the rag will help to alleviate some of those issues. Now I want to talk for a moment about the purpose of this wax ring. This sits underneath the toilet, and it sits on top of this flange here, and it serves a very important purpose, is that it creates the seal so that everything that's within the toilet, as it moves out of the toilet, continues on down into the pipe rather than out onto your bathroom floor. And so as you set up this wax ring, you want to make sure that you don't mess around with it too much. Once you apply the pressure of the toilet down onto the wax, that you stop and you just bolt it into place. No more wiggling or moving it around after that point. If you do find it's necessary to move it around, you want to replace or use a new wax ring rather than trying to reuse the old, because that seal is really, really important. Stay tuned, and we'll go through the process of putting the toilet back onto this flange here, this toilet flange. I understand that unboxing videos are all the rage right now, so we're going to have a little unboxing of our toilet. Now, I already did the first stage of getting the pieces out of the main box, and I didn't record that because you would have seen me huffing and puffing with a red face. Here I can maintain a certain amount of decorum and dignity. So I already removed the first set of straps before the idea occurred to me. Now these are really easy to remove if they have an end that you can pull on, because all you have to do is they separate. And half of a toilet. Now, the other reason why I wanted to go through this is that I'm going to show you the bottom here. This is the hole in which everything is going to remove itself. Everything will vacate. And this next part will only apply if you're installing a new toilet flange. And the question comes up as to the appropriate height of the flange relative to your floor. And I've run across two opinions on the whole thing. Is that one, it should be flush, absolutely flush with the floor, not deviating even a little bit. And the other is it must be 1/4 inch above the floor, absolutely 1/4 inch, not deviating even a little bit. And so I was curious as to which one is true and why. And so if you come down here and look at the height of the toilet relative to the hole, and you'll see that the two are exactly the same. In other words, that the hole would sit at ground level. So we have the mouth of the toilet that sits flush with the rim of the toilet. The rim of the toilet sits on the ground, and if the flange were flush on the ground, you would see that there is, you can't see. Well, I'll tell you. Oh, the suspense is killing me. 5/8 of an inch between the rim of the toilet and what would be considered the bottom of the toilet, I guess. And so you have 5/8 of an inch of space. Now, when the wax ring sits, it sits down here on this surface. And so you have 5/8 of an inch in which to work. In other words, if the flange were parallel, as this level is, with the bottom of the toilet, then there'll be 5/8 of an inch of the wax ring. If the wax ring were actually a 1/4 inch higher, it would sit down a 1/4 inch deeper inside of this hole, and there is still, do some quick math, 3/8 of an inch for the wax to compress and spread and fill the space. In other words, in my opinion, it can be either flush with the floor or up to a 1/4 inch above the floor, and you are going to be fine. All right, first thing we do is we set the bolts. Now, with these bolts, they've got a nice little plastic washer on the end that's going to help to hold them into place. And I'm going to keep the rag filling in the hole until I'm done, because like I said, I've dropped things down the drain before. If you are doing this on your own and you have an existing flange that you're working with, I highly recommend wearing gloves. It's gross. And it's not just gross as in icky, but gross as in unhealthy. The way that we set this is we take the bolt, and we put it inside the hole, slide it back to approximately the halfway point, and then we slide the plastic washer down so that it's going to stay in place. You'll find one on either side, and do the same thing there, like so. Now they'll stay more or less in place, and I'm going to need to fit the toilet over the top. Only now do I take the rag out, and then I take the wax ring, follow the instructions that say push to remove. Normally they come apart as one unit, but that's all right. Now, what's left is this. That funnel shape goes down into the toilet, so you have the wax ring sitting up on top. And then I'm going to lift the bowl and place it on top of these two bolts, and then apply pressure down onto the wax ring to get it to create a seal. Now, this toilet has just come out of the factory, the shop. And it's funny because we do have this sort of ingrained, taught aversion to touching toilets in general. It is clean, no one's used it. Now, the toilet is heavy. One of the nice things about this setup is that it comes in two pieces, so I only have the weight of half the toilet. The tank will be put on later. And you'll find there are these holes right back here. Oops. You'll find these holes right there on either side that are going to be placed right, or that I'm going to place the bolts through. I have to move carefully and ensure that I don't jostle the wax ring or disturb those bolts too far, because they're right where I want them to be. Now, it's only sitting lightly on the wax ring at the moment. I make sure that it's more or less straight. And without any square edges anyplace, it's hard to measure too straight. But that looks more or less where I want it to be. The bolts are sticking through the holes. So now I come right over the wax ring, which is about here, and apply even pressure downwards. At this point, it's still loose, and so I need to be careful bumping it or moving it around too much. But it feels, as I put weight on it, it's not rocking to either side, meaning that I have the entire base of the toilet more or less securely on the ground. And now I'm going to screw it into place. The kit with the wax ring sent me washers, a pair of washers and a pair of, I think they're locking nuts. Well, either way, nuts. And that's what I use to lock the bolts into place. Now, before you tighten down the bolts on the toilet, the last thing that you're going to need are, let's see, I'll put it in, there we go, are these little caps that will go cover up the bolts on the toilet. But you'll also need this piece, and this is important to have at this point before it gets bolted down, because this gets bolted down at the same time as the nut is put in place around the edge of the toilet. There's a little marking on there that says this side up, I think. Yep. So make sure you put it in the correct orientation. First, the metal washer. Then, the plastic cap. I don't know what you call this. Locking piece. Make sure it's the correct side up. Then, the nut. As I put these in place, I want to make sure that I'm going back and forth from side to side so that the toilet is being pushed down onto the floor evenly rather than cockeyed one side higher than the other, because I went too tight on one side before moving to the other. Now, one of the things that I always struggled with as I was learning anything, whether it's mechanical repair or home repairs, people say things like, don't over tighten. How in the world do you know what over tight actually is? And it changes from product to product and industry to industry. What I'm looking for here is that if I look from the side, the metal washer is starting to deform. It's starting to drop, be pulled down into the hole. And I'm also seeing the plastic one up on top cupping a little bit from that pressure. So that's probably as tight as it needs to be. And if I give the toilet some pressure, it's not moving. That's where I want. Now, if you look in close, you'll see the brake line, that little groove in there, which tells me that I've gone below and I can break the bolt at that point. And I will show you how we do that. In order to break that bolt, all you need is a pair of pliers. We grab the bolt above the brake line and we bend. That's it. It's now broken, or now the bolt is low enough that I can place the cap over top. And it's locked into place. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now we put the tank on. There are 3 bolts. Turn it a little bit so you get a better view on it. 3 bolts. And they have this rubber washer on the bottom, and that's really important. That's where we're going to get our water seal to make sure that we don't get water from the tank running out onto the floor. This rubber seal here, equally important, because this is how the water gets from the tank into the toilet. Now, if I apply pressure to one of these bolts from the inside, you'll see that it pushes the rubber washer out of alignment. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, it does. And you want to make sure that that's not the case when you put it into place. You want to make sure that all 3 washers are flat and even so that they get a good seat on the seat of the toilet. Now I can't really see from this angle, so I want to make sure that the bolts, all three, are poking through. There's that one. And these little tanks, while very efficient, don't give you a lot of room to work with. Now, with the toilet, we also got 3 washers, 3 nuts. As you would expect, they go on top of the 3 bolts. Again, as I bolt this into place, I want to go evenly around, securing a few turns on each of the bolts so that the tank gets an even seat onto the toilet. Now I can also use a level, or no, I should use a level, you should use a level, to make sure that the tank is going on evenly, checking it both side to side and front to back. And that'll also help you to ensure that the bolts are going down evenly. And as you're going along, if you find even, as you get near the end, it's not a bad idea to start to count the number of turns to keep it even. There's always a side that's easier or a side that we have better access to. And if we're not attentive to it, we will tighten that side down more than the side it's harder to get to. And as you do this, make sure you're tightening them rather than tightening one and loosening another. And it just occurred to me, I should check the level of the floor to make sure that the level of the tank equals the level of the floor, because if the floor slopes to one direction, as we bolt the seat down, if it's level, it'll also slope in the same direction. And then you want to have the tank, in order to be level with the seat, to also slope in that same direction. Now, if it's a dramatic slope, you've got a bigger problem, but right now we're looking fairly even. We won't know if we've tightened the bolts enough until we put water into the tank, and we want to watch to ensure that we don't have any leaks. Next step will be to hook up the water source. When I picked up this toilet on the website, it listed suggested material to go along with it, and one of them was a 12-inch toilet hose. Now, at first I was irritated because I wasn't confident that was going to be the length, and I wondered why there wasn't any markings in the box. And then it occurred to me, not everybody has a water source that's in the same place. So 12 inches recommended, but depending on where your pipe, the outlet coming out of the wall or out of the floor may be, you might need something shorter or longer. So you'll notice that it's 2 different connectors. The wider one goes into the tank, and the shorter one goes into the wall source. Now, here you'll notice there's a rubber gasket inside. Same thing on this end. What this means, and this is really important, is that we do not need to use any sort of pipe dope or thread tape or anything like that. When there's rubber washers, the washer creates the seal, and that's why we use some of the other materials like pipe thread. If you have the rubber washer, you do not use pipe thread, because actually the pipe thread interferes. It keeps you from getting a good seat on the rubber washer inside this connector. All right, so on the bottom where it goes into the water source, down at the bottom, I'm going to use a wrench, and then at the top, I should be able to get where I need to be going hand tight, but of course we can verify that once we turn on the water. Funny thing, I got the wrong connector. That's too big. It doesn't fit. I'm not sure why. I'm guessing when this house was built back in the 80s that they didn't use or the standards were different, and that at that point they were using a smaller fixture. I'm going to see if I can find the old toilet, see if I can use that connector. Alright, quick PSA on choosing the right material. Check your connectors before you go and buy anything. I'm installing 2 toilets, and so I bought 2 hoses, and as luck would have it, I got 2 different size connectors. One is 3/8 inch comp to valve, the other is a 1/2 inch FIP to valve. And I'm lucky that I did that because one of them fits, luckily. So I can install one toilet now, and the other one I can install at a later date. So always make sure that you have the right piece, right connector. Make sure not to over tighten. Alright, I'm going to leave the tag on just for a moment, but there's no reason for it to be there. I will cut it off once we're done. Bend this so that it's back towards the toilet, a little more out of sight, and we're all set there. Alright, we have not put the top of the tank on yet. We have not put the seat on yet. First thing we need to do is to test to make sure that we have a good seal. You want to make sure you have some rags around before you do so. So, excuse me. All right, rags. Now, quick conversation about how this toilet will fill up with water. That is the order in which we check joints for leaks. Anything that we just connected or attached, we want to be able to check to make sure that it's not leaking. So it's going to start off down here. This is the valve we're going to turn on. It'll flow up into the tank. Next place that we check. As the tank fills, we got the 3 points of contact. So really you're looking for any leaks that might occur at this seal, both front and back, and then the toilet will fill. And of course, lastly, we have the wax seal at the bottom of the toilet. Now that may not see any water until we flush, depending on how it fills. So we turn on the water. Slowly. I turn it on just a little bit. And with a very low flow, I use my fingers to check those spots for water. Oop, I got a leak. And the spot that it's leaking is actually a spot that I expected. I was worried about, I should say. I need a bucket. So it was a spot that I was worried about because when I looked at it, it seemed like I was seeing more daylight on this side, the bolt on this side, than I was at the other 2 locations. It seemed like it wasn't seated as tightly over here as it was other places. But Level was telling me I was done, so I stopped. I shouldn't have done that, obviously. So back to tightening those bolts. Now, it stopped dripping. Maybe that might be because we're out of water in the tank, or that might be because it's tight enough. It's tight enough. We'll find out. Very low flow of water. Now I also want to get it dry here so that any sign of new water becomes obvious easily. I don't want to wonder if I've got a leak or not. Woof. Yeah. So now it's not even. I'll have to fix that. But first, I want to make sure that the leaks are taken care of. While it's filling, tighten these up. Toilet's full. First I listen for drips. Check with my hand for wetness. No, that was just cold. Look for any leaks. And then we check the flush and the wax ring. No sign of leaks, but I don't consider this job done until it's been sitting for, let's say, half an hour and I've flushed it a few times, because some leaks might take a little while to show up, and I want to be really confident that I can walk away without water coming out. One last thing I want to show you is this flushing mechanism. A few years ago, the two-button flushers were very popular, but they didn't work very well. They would fail with some frequency. And this flusher is the next generation, and it's sort of like a flush on demand or water on demand. The way that it works is a quick press of the flush lever releases a small amount of water, which is sufficient for most uses. In order to get more water, all you do is hold down the lever. When I flush, just a quick flick, and I'll show you in a moment, it uses about half the water in the tank. And you have access to all the water in the tank simply by holding the lever down when you go to flush. So if you watch. See? So you only need to use as much water, well, you only need to use as much water as you need to use. And so you need more water, hold the lever down longer. It's much more effective, and you have a lot more nuanced control, and it'll last a lot longer than the other ones that were failing all the time. I'll put on the tank, or I'll put on the tank cover, I'll put on the seat, and then this job is done. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section. And of course, please help out by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Thank you.